All right, we are in week 6 of our college class together. And though I threw a loop with you last week, making you read chapter 12, we are back in order with chapter 6, the Mediterranean peoples. Basically, the known world can thank these peoples for exactly why we are today. We'll start off with the early civilization ones and kind of touch on the great Greek civilization before we're jumping into Rome next week. So I'm really looking forward to it since these are kind of one of my favorite things to talk about in ancient history. Right here on my screen is probably the most famous Greek of them all, and he wasn't even Greek himself. This is Alexander the Great. He is actually Macedonian, but that comes much later in our lesson. So basically, you can see this nice little timeline, and the Mediterranean people start with the Minoan civilization. It started on the island of Crete, and those of you who know Greek mythology, this is where the Minotaur comes from. Minotaur literally meaning like bull from the Minos people in the island of Crete with the labyrinth. So you can see a lot of the ancient Greek history being coming from this region. Not a lot is known about the Minoans, one, because they are over 4,000 years old, and two, because they wrote in Linear A. We, to this day, still have no idea what Linear A means. All the letters, all the symbols in it is just mumble jumble to us. So Linear A writing, we cannot read at all, but thanks to pottery, thanks to the ships, thanks to all of their creations, we were able to kind of like piece some things together, as in they were early sailing civilization, being able to make advancements and really trade with the whole Mediterranean Sea, even though they're mostly located on the island of Crete. Through this timeline, you can see the Phoenician alphabet, the Olympic Games. Yes, the ones we still celebrate to this day started back in 776 BCE. And then we'll see Rome is founded. We're not going to talk too much about Rome, but we'll get to that later. The Persian Wars with Greece, the Peloponnesian War, and good old Alexander right there. So we can see a lot changes, but also in a very relatively short amount of time. So after the Minoan civilization, as you can see, this entire early Mediterranean people, right there comes the Mycenaeans. This is the first civilization that's actually on Europe. There is no civilization beforehand that says, yes, they started in Europe. Now, does that mean there's nobody living in Europe? No. That just means that they were the first ones to actually settle down and live there. The Mycenaeans took over the Minoan civilization. They were the warriors. They were the ones who wanted to go to war, the ones who really were like, I want that. So they took that. They traded all around the civilizations. You can see the Hittites, the Antonians, Egypt, and then we still have Carthage, and then eventually the Rome. So like the people of early Rome, right there. So they traded with the Phoenicians, and thanks to their writing, Linear B, which we can actually read, we were able to figure out some more things about them. They started to, like I said, be more of those warrior tribes that really liked their stuff. So they took it instead of trading so much. Then around 1200 BC, so the Minoans, let's see here, we go back up to our timeline. If the Minoans started in 2000, the Mycenaeans probably around 1500, give or take. And then 300 years later, in 1200 BCE, the world goes dark. So just like in the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, it happened back in the ancient times as well. Basically, people stop being like, they stop living and they go back to surviving. They don't really start advancing things. They forget how to read. They forget how to do things. And they just kind of focus on where's my next meal? Where's my next score for insert what they want, instead of how can we make life better. During this time period, the mysterious sea people start appearing. We still don't really know who these people were. They just kind of came, conquered, messed things up, and then disappeared as quickly as they came. Because in about 1100 BC, that's when the Phoenicians kick in. When the Phoenicians come in, they kick out everybody and they start revamping the whole idea of what it means to be Greek. So you can see some ancient paintings, trade routes, and all of the Phoenicians, like, influence, that's the word, where they all go. So even though right there where my mouse is, hopefully you can see that, is ancient Greece, is where the Phoenicians started, all these little black dots and all these little stars are where they had their influence. So when we say they conquered the Mediterranean, this is what we mean. They had their influence, they had their will all around that giant sea. Well, the Phoenicians, they have that first alphabet. They're the ones who basically allow us to see an alphabet. They use symbols to represent things and sounds, but one of the weird ones is they didn't really have vowels. So if you looked at words, it was more consonants, and the vowels we just kind of filled in based on the consonants. So you can see in today's world with some of the words we use, that's very unhelpful. No vowels would be very, very confusing and very hard to understand. But back then, they kind of had that whole system figured out. So that's why we can read it, but we can't always read it. And the Greeks start around the same time as the Phoenicians, a little bit later, in like 800 BCE. So the Greek civilization was only really good for about 500 years. Long time in the grand scheme of things, or long time thinking, but in the grand scheme of things, it's basically a blink of the eye, especially when we talk about Rome, who was powerful for over 2,000 years. So looking at the Greek civilization, it starts with the Archaic era, the Dark Ages, not a lot going on. This is where kings and queens ruled the area. We start to see the rise of Athens and Sparta near the end of the Archaic time period. We'll talk more about those two civilizations in a little bit and how much they just despised each other. In this time period, Homer started writing. So the Olympics are starting to kind of be showcased. The Iliad, the Odyssey are written. Little fun fact, Iliad, if you translate it, Ili is what they called Troy in id. So the Iliad, id is kind of like story. So the Iliad translates to Troy story instead of Toy Story. Little fun fact. But the Archaic time period, the city-states start growing. So there is no true ancient Greek civilization until Alexander the Great conquers it way later in like 336. So at this time, it's just a bunch of random city-states popping up, kings ruling, and soon democracy starts to kind of showcase through as well, especially in Athens, and that's where it's considered to be started. So, like I said, at Sparta and Athens, they rose up and they had very different ideas on how the world should run. Athens loved stuff. They loved the shiny stuff. They loved the fancy stuff. They loved their foods. They wanted to kind of show off, where Sparta was very militaristic, very organized, and not very luxurious. They were rich, but very few people. In Sparta, like 35% of people were citizens, like another 35 were outsiders, and maybe like 30 were slaves. So still a lot of slaves at this time, but overall pretty spread out. In Sparta, 92% of the population were some type of enslaved people. So that's where we can see the very strict and organized way Sparta was, whereas Athens allowed you a lot more freedoms if you were a dude. Girls definitely preferred Sparta because Sparta had that idea of if you can fight, you're worthwhile to us. If you can't, you're like just useless. So they got rid of you. And so they used anyone and everyone for warriors as long as you were able to fight. So you can kind of see a lot of different ideas of where they came from. You can as you read all this, you can really compare the two. And where Greece takes its hold, where Athens rises above all, where Sparta really clicks, is during the classical Greece time period. From 500 to 323 BCE, this time period really is what you think of when you think of Greece. This is where all the artwork, all the beautiful columns and the architecture just shine through. It's the golden age. Though the golden age sounds like it's perfect and beautiful, and it was also the time where the two major wars took place. The first one was the war with the Persians. Now, if you look at this map, everything in red is ancient Persia. This little circle right here, that is the ancient Greeks. But yet, it was the Greeks who beat the Persians. King Xerxes of Persia, King Darius of Persia, attacked and attacked and attacked. They tried time and time again to cross the Aegean and take over little brother of Greece. But it never took place. For those of you who have seen the movie 300, and those of you who took my class back in middle school and you yelled, "This is Sparta," yes, this is where it comes from. The movie 300 is definitely a Hollywood movie, but in Thermopylae, the 300 Spartans stood their ground. They used superior military tactic, and they were able to just stop the Persians for a very, very long time. Now, eventually, they all died because thousands against 300, you're always going to take the thousands. But for a very, very long time, for weeks, they made the Persians sweat it out. They made the Persians stop and think, is this worth it? And some of them were starting to think, no, it's not. One thing about that is they had help from other city-states. King Leonidas was had a bunch more people go to this area. However, because they were not Spartan, because they had some disagreements in how they believed the fighting should go, Leonidas sent them home. He's like, no, we don't want them. Terrible military tactics, saying, no, we don't want soldiers, especially when you're outnumbered 300 to 5,000-10,000. But that was the Spartan way, and they kind of showcased their military might through it all. Well, after fighting, comes up Athens and Sparta. After Persia no longer starts invading, they're like, hey, these two city-states are the most powerful. Athens versus Sparta. It's time to see who finally is number one. Well, and that's where the Peloponnesian War comes from. Peloponnese is right here, this little peninsula where Sparta is. They broke up into two allied ships, Athens with the Delian League, so everything in green, versus Sparta and their league, which is represented in purple. So for 25 years, these two city-states and their allies fought each other back and forth, until finally Sparta was victorious. At this point, Greece is weak. They just fought two long wars. Everyone, and one was a civil war. They literally fought against themselves, and that allowed for the Hellenistic time period to start, and more importantly, our friend Alexander to come down and say hi. So as you can see me scrolling, trying to find a better map, these are some of those famous Greek paintings, famous Greek sculptors, and right there's the Hellenistic era. All that sculpting, all those beautiful jars came in the classical period. This time period comes with Alexander and everyone wanting to be like the Greeks. So King Philip II of Macedonia was in charge, and he was watching Greece down below. So if you look at a map, Macedonia is to the north of Greece, and they're just looking and looking and looking. They're just waiting to see what are these civilizations doing down there. If they're having a civil war, they're Macedonia is we're not going to join, but we're going to watch. And the second that they stopped fighting, they saw this is our chance. King Philip wanted to make his mark on the world, and so he took his army south and conquered Greece without much difficulty, because at this point, Greece was out of money. Greece was out of soldiers, and they were just tired of fighting. Well, in 336 BCE, Philip was killed mysteriously. It says here killed by assassin with a personal grudge. Well, more research we do, the more we see that, he was killed by assassin, but who paid that assassin? And when you look at ancient time period, when the king dies before they should have died, always look towards the son. Well, his son becomes known Alexander the Great. He wanted to rule. He wanted to take over the world. And honestly, that is exactly what he did. He just spent from 336 until his death. He conquered this world. He goes down to Egypt. He goes across Persia. He takes over basically this map. Everything you see highlighted is now Alexander's territory. He controls it. In fact, Alexander has a huge, huge, huge ego in the sense that he named 70 different towns after himself. Alexandria. The one in Egypt actually becomes a very major port city, a very major city in general, allowing it to influence Egypt for many years to come. So Alexander is conquering the world. You can see he gets all the way to the Hindu mountains over there by Egypt. And at this point, his troops are tired. Just like the Greeks back when Macedonia conquered, they've been fighting. They want to go home. All right, this is many, many miles away from their home. They want to see their families again. They're sick and tired of war and all these foreign places. They want their comforts of home. Well, Alexander doesn't like that, and they start disagreeing. Mutiny takes place, but Alexander conquers because he's Alexander the Great. And they kind of have that conversation, and they're like, kind of make that agreement of, okay, we're going to conquer some more, but we'll work our way back. Well, Alexander the Great, well, considering he had his own historian with him, that's why he's known as the Great. He's kind of petty because he decides to take the worst route possible home. He goes through deserts, through dangerous mountain passes, through like just the forest, like basically every wrong area you want to take, he took to show his soldiers how he's in charge and not them. And once he gets to like Baghdad, so somewhere right over here, he gets very, very ill. We don't know if it was some disease. We don't know if it was some because he was an alcoholic, if it was like alcohol poisoning. We don't know if it was just kind of like the exhaustion of the body or insert very mysterious, and he died. We today don't know where his tomb is. So you'll see a lot of historians try to kind of find his tomb, but he mysteriously died. It was over and Greece fell apart. There was no next in line after Alexander. So his military generals broke up all the regions, and let's see here, Alexander died. Oh, shoot, I didn't write it down. I'm sorry, folks. Alexander died in like 332, something like that. Not. Sorry, 323. There we go. Mixed up the numbers. 323, he's dead. And so from 800 to 323, Greece is kind of done. Now, they still try to limp on. The Ptolemy, they rule Egypt. In fact, Cleopatra is not Egyptian. She's actually Greek, actually Macedonian through Greek, through the Ptolemaic bloodline. So they some have success, but overall, Greece kind of just piddles out. And they're really no more. And they have different kingdoms saying, hey, we're here, we're there. But it kind of just dies out until the Roman Empire comes. But first, it starts with the Roman Republic. Now, here's a little treat for you, folks. Once you get to 6.4, the Roman Republic, you can stop reading for the week. You can continue and finish the chapter if you want, but the quiz, the discussion, none of that will have anything about Rome. So you can stop reading there. So as always, what do you have to do this week? Watch this video. Check. do the discussion, which I turned into a journal. So I kind of changed it a little bit. So it says Greece journal in parentheses, week 6 discussion, meaning it's worth more points. I'm asking you to write 3 paragraphs and basically explaining all the nuances of ancient Greece. I've listed a whole bunch of questions there to help you guide your essay. Do comment on at least 2 discussion or 2 journal posts because we want to keep that discussion part going. And then do the quiz as always. So just those simple things. Read chapter 6 for you if you need to dig deeper than what I've talked about so far. With that being said, we are done with this video. Have fun and good luck.